This isn't really a paranormal story, but I remember it so well. I was young, maybe 10 or 11, and home alone after school. I was working on my homework upstairs when someone rang the doorbell. Sometimes my friend down the street would come over, so I ran downstairs thinking it was her. There was window above our door, and it was very high up, so usually I could stand at the top of the stairs and look through it to see who was at the door at the top of their head. This time there was a man just looking through that window. It must have been 7 feet off the ground, and he was eye line with it. He had a very round face, I remember, and a huge smile. It was something out of a horror movie. Then my cat, who I regularly call Slutty because he is so friendly, LOL, starts growling. My kitty was on the landing with me. He sees me at the top of the stair landing and just says, "Hi, I'm here to check for pests. Can you let me in?" I duck down and he says, "I saw you. I know your parents aren't home, but I need to come in." I still hear his voice clearly. I was terrified and run down the stairs and into the kitchen to grab a phone. He keeps asking me to open the door. Finally, I tell him something like, "No, you'll have to come back another time." He won't take no for answer, just keeps repeating himself. Then I tell him I'm gonna call the police. All politeness out the window. Says something about me being rude and that I'm stopping him from doing his job. I keep repeating that I will call the police, and he finally starts just screaming and cursing at me. And finally he slams his hand as hard as he can into the door. I start dialing and he runs off calling me a bitch. I don't finish calling the police and sit near our front door until my parents came home. I didn't even know what bitch meant. Didn't tell them because I thought I'd get in trouble. Definitely not as scary as others here, but I remember it so clearly. His weird smile. Number 2, trigger warning. One Monday evening I was on the game with my 3 brothers. We lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. It was around 8 p.m. so the sun was setting, the sky still orange, but I went to go crack the window open because it was getting super hot in the room, and I saw this woman with a kitchen knife in her hand sitting in on the hood of a Ford Taurus I believe was hers. She was crying and she was bleeding a lot as it was showing over her white shirt. She looked about 20 years old. I told my brothers to look at the same time. I picked up my phone and called 911. Put the phone on speaker and told the operator what we was seeing. She told us that they were already getting calls about her, and I believed her because a few minutes later we started to hear a bunch of police sirens in the distance. I've never seen so many police cars whip the corner and surround her and pretty much the entire building. They called a SWAT truck over as well. Long story short, they negotiated with her and got her to surrender. Apparently she killed her abusive boyfriend and was attempting to kill herself as well by stabbing herself. But she made a recovery, and I don't know what else happened to her from there. Most bizarre stuff I've ever seen and probably will ever see. Number 3. I was walking home from middle school, probably around age 12 to 13. I lived in a pretty small town, and for quite a bit the walk home was on the grassy side of this tiny main road that ran out of town towards my house. As I was approaching a train crossing, I heard a car coming up the road towards me from behind. I had no reason to believe it was any different than any other car that had passed by me, but something made me turn around and look. There was an old Buick, driving through the grass directly towards me with the driver white-knuckling the wheel and staring at me with this level of hate on his face I'd never seen before or since. I managed to jump out of the way into the nearby field, and the car swerved back onto the road and drove off. If it had been somebody not paying attention, that had been one thing, but this dude was absolutely gunning for me, and I have no clue who he was or why it happened. It's been almost 30 years, and hearing a car approaching from behind still sets me on edge. Number 4. I was living with my cousin, her boyfriend, and his roommate. We smoked weed in the garage. The attic entrance was in the garage, and there was a drop-down ladder to get into it. The door to the outside of the garage on the side of the house didn't lock, so we made sure to keep the one that led into the house locked. There was a few times we would hear what sounded like walking in the ceiling. We would brush it off as squirrels or animals that got into the attic. We would make jokes about the attic people because it would freak us out, and it's how we coped. Oh, have fun being alone while we're all at work today. Don't let the attic people get you. Type of thing. One day when my cousin and I were smoking in the garage, we heard an extremely audible snore from the attic. We immediately went silent and stared at each other wide-eyed. We both booked it out of the garage, leaving the bowl behind and running to her car. None of the boys were home and we didn't feel safe enough to check it out, so we just spent the day driving around till her boyfriend and the roommate got home from work. They went and checked it out. The bowl we were smoking earlier was cached. In the attic itself, there was a makeshift bed with some old blankets, a few bottles of pee, and a few food packages. Not a single person, though. Come to find out a few months after we had moved out, it was her boyfriend's drugged-out uncle living in our attic. We ended up really having attic people. Number 5. For times in my life, I've had dreams that I can only describe as premonitions. I'm a skeptic and I still like to mostly believe that what I've experienced is pure coincidence, otherwise it creeps me out too much. These dreams are hyper-realistic and very specific. Usually I wake up from them with an intense need to immediately puke. The first one I saw my good friend hanging out with some of his friends. They were planning to go party and decided to carpool. He gets into the back seat of a blue 4-door sedan just behind the passenger. The car gets into a terrible accident and he's ejected from the car as he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He dies on the side of the road before first responders can get to him. I woke up, barely made it to the bathroom, and my whole body was shaking. I didn't want to call him and felt like a complete idiot even thinking of calling him, but couldn't shake the feeling this was about to happen. So I call him, tell him the details, and ask that if he goes out that night to please wear his seatbelt. He confirmed they were going to a club that night, but otherwise laughed it off and was like, whatever. About an hour later, he calls me, hysterical, crying and repeating that I saved his life. When he calmed down, he said that soon after the call, his friends pulled up to pick him and others up. One had a brand new blue Honda Civic that they motioned him to jump into. He felt stupid, but he told them he'd actually go in the other friend's car. On the way to the club, while crossing a busy intersection, someone blew a red light and T-boned the Civic, dead on the back passenger side. The car was totaled. The driver and passenger survived, but with serious injuries they still deal with today. Again, I want to believe it was just coincidence, but I've had a few more coincidental dreams like this, and it seriously freaks me out when it happens. Number 6. Back at my first workplace years ago, I went to take a lady back to her room for bed. The workplace was a memory care area and everyone living in it had roommates. Once I got to the room, I noticed the lady's roommate had her arms sticking up. That moment I realized the person wasn't making noises. She would mumbled words, mostly looking for her family. I turned on the lights, looked over and saw she passed. Her face was open wide like she was terrified, and I noticed her eyes too. I carefully closes the separation curtain, looked out in the hallway for my coworker and get them to bring the nurse over. My coworker mentioned to me that they just put the roommate down not long ago, like within 10 minutes. They also mentioned that the roommate was saying things in the bathhouse when they were getting ready for bed and looking at the same area. TLDR. Found a patient that not only passed, but their face looked like they got scared to death and their arms were sticking up. Number 7. 30 years ago, I was lying in bed next to my husband about 1 a.m. I couldn't sleep because his snoring was incredibly loud. I noticed something shift at the edge of my bed, so started looking in that direction. Then, plain as effing day, 2 silhouettes with appearance of TV static were standing there. As I opened my eyes even wider trying to make out what I was seeing, they instantly started bolting toward me, coming right through the bed. Not smooth movements either, but like in one movement they were a foot closer, then another sudden movement they advanced 2 or 3 feet closer. Like bam, 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 each bam being another sudden movement closer, right at me. I started kicking, screaming, and swatting at them. My poor husband, LOL, jumped out of the bed, knocking everything off the side table trying to wake up and react to whatever had me freaking out. I will never forget that shit. Same house. A couple of months later, I'm sitting in our infant's room around 2 a.m. after having finished a bottle. We're just kind of rocking in the dark, when I start feeling like something was watching us from the corner of the room. I'm not a religious person, don't believe in God or the devil and stuff like that, so my rational brain was trying to talk me out of being scared when all of a sudden, my son straightened right up, looked in the direction I was eyeballing and happily goes, "Hi," and started kicking his feet. Freaked me TF out. 2 weeks later, my husband was out of town. At this point, I'm a little afraid of being alone in our apartment, so I started staying up late. Afraid to go to bed alone. It was 3 foot Isham. I turned the TV off and set off for my bedroom. Once I got to the end of the hall, the TV turned back on. I kept telling myself I probably set the remote against something, so went back to the living room to turn it off again. But nope, the remote was sitting securely on the table where I left it. I turned every light on in that apartment and slept that way until my husband returned. We started making arrangements to move that week. And I've never had another experience since.